I was just looking at the letter you've written to the Justice Secretary. If this was your A-level results, you wouldn't be getting into any university anytime soon.
No, extremely concerning letter that we've written. We are very worried about what we found at HMP Woodhill, a prison that holds some long-term and very high-risk prisoners, yep. And an enormous amount that needs to be done. What's interesting is that, in addition to the specifics, is the lack of improvement over the years, which of course wasn't lost on you, Charlie, when you did this report. No, that's absolutely right. We've been concerned about Woodhill for some time. This is a prison that holds some of the most risky prisoners in the country. It's got prisoners who've been in often for a long time, who are doing long stretches, and they're experienced prisoners, often in the case of Woodhill being looked after and supervised by extremely inexperienced staff. And what we found, and this has been an ongoing theme at Woodhill, is there simply aren't enough staff to be able to run a good, safe jail. And looking at this and reading what you have written and the report that you compiled, it seems fundamentally that this really does come down to start. First and foremost, there are other issues there, of course, but fundamentally it's a staffing problem. Yes, it is. And of course, what's happened at Woodhill is they've got into a vicious cycle, because Woodhill has the highest number of serious staff assaults of any jail in the country. And of course, that for many staff members means they don't want to work there. They don't want to work in an environment where they're going in and they're feeling unsafe. And that leads to higher levels of staff sickness, higher levels of staff attrition. And that simply feeds into the problem that we saw in the jail, with prisoners not being unlocked, prisoners not feeling supervised. And what's interesting about this jail is that 70% of prisoners told us that they themselves have been frightened in their time at Woodhill. And these are long-serving, experienced prisoners. Yeah. And yet they were nervous. There were 26 who were too frightened to even come out of their cells. Wow. And that isn't really how prison should be functioning. I know there's always a hang 'em and flog 'em fraternity out there, Charlie, but even putting that aside, that's not how prisons work effectively, and that's not how our prisons are meant to work at all. Well, absolutely right. I mean, these guys have committed serious offences and they are in prison for a reason. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the men at Woodhill will be coming out sometime. Yeah. And the question we have to ask is their experience of being in Woodhill, is that making them more or less likely to reoffend when they come out? And our enormous concern is it's making them more likely to reoffend. Levels of drugs inside the prison are incredibly high. And things like education, opportunities to get to work, the sorts of habits and the sorts of skills that prisoners need if they're going to succeed when they come out, those things are being routinely cancelled. Why again? Because there aren't enough staff. Yeah. What sort of teeth does your department have in this? You can inspect prisons, you can compile your recommendations, you can write very reasonable letters such as this, very important letters such as this to in this case, the Secretary of State for Justice. What then happens? Have you heard from Mr. Chalk in response to this yet? Well, the Secretary of State has 28 days in which to respond to this letter, and with an action plan explaining what the prison service is going to do. But of course, the prison service, to some extent, is hamstrung by the population crisis that it has at the moment. The number of prisoners coming into jail simply isn't keeping pace with the number of places that are available. Yeah. And what you would have done in the past with a jail like Woodhill that had got into such serious difficulties is you would have closed down 2 or 3 rings, half the amount of prisoners in the jail, and then gradually built it up. Of course, at the moment, that simply isn't an option because of pressures on population. So this is a real challenge that we're laying down to the prison service and to ministers to fix what is an intractable and long-term problem at a complex jail. And I would imagine that even if Mr. Chalk or others respond recognising everything and acknowledging that all of these points are reasonable and need addressing, with the best will in the world, that can't happen overnight. It won't happen overnight, but what we want to see is clear action that shows us that progress is happening. We'll be back at Woodhill within the next year, and we'll want to see a considerable improvement on what we found this time round. If not, we would be enormously concerned. This is a critically important jail in Britain. It's part of the long-term high security estate, and it must be functioning better. We must be doing a better job with these long-term and often high-risk prisoners, because if we don't, when they come out, they're going to pose a risk to the public, and that's not good enough.